Hello guys, today let's talk about Docker. And before creating our Docker file, or in our case our Docker compose file for our project, I want to give you an introduction to what Docker is. And also I want to dive into some concepts and terminology essential to understanding how Docker works. And let's start with these definitions that I got from the official Docker website. So Docker is an open source platform for developing, shipping, and running applications. Docker provides the ability to package and run an application in an isolated environment called container. And containers contain everything needed to run the application. So basically with Docker, we solve that it works on my machine issue. If you have been in the software development industry for a while, you have probably heard that sentence, or even said that at some point. It used to be very common for the development environment to be different from the production one. The OS could be different, some package versions could not be the same, and so on. And with Docker, we can have the exactly same environment as the production one. So with the same operational system, the same version of packages, and so on, we can reproduce the exactly same behavior in both environments. And nowadays, it is very common for Docker itself to be used in production environments, especially if you are working in a microservices architecture. Another aspect of Docker that is very important is that a Docker container reuses some parts of the operational system of the machine that is running the Docker, or the Docker host. So running a Docker container becomes much lighter compared to a virtual machine, for example. And this is an overview of the Docker architecture. Like I said, the Docker host is the machine that runs Docker, and Docker provides an API to manage its objects, such as images, containers, networks, volumes, and so on. And you can use any client to interact with Docker, like the Docker desktop for Mac, Windows, or the Docker CLI, or the command line interface of Docker. And Docker daemon is the component on Docker host that listens for the Docker API requests and does the work of building and running the containers and manage those Docker objects. And now let's go over the most important Docker objects. And the first one that I want to talk about is the Docker image. So the Docker container, like I said, is an executable package of software that includes everything needed to run an application. And the Docker image is like the recipe or the template with a set of instructions to build a Docker container. The registry is a place where we can store and distribute these Docker images. And Docker Hub is the official registry provided by Docker, but there are other registries out there and from other companies like AWS, Azure, and so on, but usually we use the Docker Hub, and we usually build images based on other images. For example, we can use a Node.js Docker image as a base image to build our own image and for our application, for our Node.js application, and we can use for example, an image with a Linux distribution like Ubuntu and install Node.js on top of it. And these are some examples of images. We create Docker images using a Dockerfile. And a Dockerfile is a text document that contains all the commands to create a new image. I'll leave the link in the description with the official documentation for the Dockerfile commands. And like I said, a Dockerfile is used to build an image from a base image. But if you don't need to change the base image, we can just pull the image from the registry and use it as it is. We'll just use a Dockerfile if we need to change the base image, like in these two examples. So in the first one, I'm using Ubuntu in the latest version, and I'm just installing some new packages. And at the end, I'm exposing a port, okay? And in the second example, as you can see, I'm using the Nginx as a base image from using the latest version, but with more additional configurations like copying some files from my local machine to the container and define a work directory. So now before I go to the next objects, the next Docker objects, I want to show you some CLI commands that we can use to interact with Docker. Okay, and the first step will be to install Docker on your machine. I will also leave the link in the description with the official documentation for installing Docker. In my case, I also have Docker Desktop installed on my machine, which is basically a graphical user interface for Docker. Here we can see, for example, the volumes, the image, and the containers. We can stop them or start them. Okay. But for this tutorial, I will be using the Docker CLI. Okay. If you're using a Windows machine, I highly recommend you to use the Windows subsystem for Linux, which is a new feature for Windows that allows you to run a Linux on a Windows machine. And it's much easier to use Docker on a Linux machine than on a Windows. Okay. If we go to the documentation, for example, here you can see that we have an option to install on Mac, on Linux, and also Windows. And here you just need to basically follow these steps here to install using a Linux subsystem. Okay. Okay, and the first command that I want to show you is Docker PS. And this command is used to list all the running containers in your machine. As you can see, I don't have any running container. However, if I run docker ps-a, we can see that I have a lot of containers here. Okay. And another command that's pretty useful is docker run. And here we can use it to run or to create a container based on an image. Okay, so we can basically type the name of the image here. But in our case, first I wanna show you first how to create your own image using a Dockerfile. Okay, and for that we can use, for example, a pretty simple Golang example. So let me go to the Golang website and search for hello world example. For example, hello world Golang. And here we have this website, go by example, and here we have this command here, which is basically a pretty simple hello world using Go. So here, let me come back to my command line. And first I'm gonna create a Golang file. Okay, so we can type hello world.go, for example, and then let me open this Golang file. Okay, now we have this Golang file, and now let me create our Docker file. So basically the name of that is Dockerfile, okay, without an extension. So like this one, Dockerfile, and let me open this thing as well. Okay, so here we can start defining our base image using the from. And in our case, we are gonna use the Golang official image. Okay, so here in the Docker Hub website, you can see that we have this official page for Golang. And basically, this is the name of the image, okay? And we can use a Docker pool to just download the image. But in our case, we can define the image here, and then when we build this image, the Docker will download the Golang image for us. Okay, so we can type here the name of the base image, in our case Golang, and we can also define the version using this syntax here, okay? Or we can use the latest version. However, if you don't use anything here, we are automatically using the latest version, okay? But I'm going to use here the latest just to show you how to define the version of your image. Okay, and the next step, we can define, for example, the work directory. In our case, we can use user/source/app, and then we can basically copy our Golang file. So we can copy the hello world.go to the user source and app directory. Okay, and then we can just run the go build command. Okay, in the last command we can just type command, and then we can just call the build of our Docker, our Golang file, okay? Because when we use go build command and then pass a go file, we basically have an executable file with the same name. So in our case, we can just execute the hello world, okay? That's it. Let me save this file right now. And now in order to build our Docker file, we can use the command docker build, and then we can define the tag or the name of our image, okay? So -t, and then I'm gonna use this convention here, which is basically the name or the username in your Docker Hub slash the name of your image. If you don't have a username or account in the Docker Hub, is not a problem, okay? But this is just a convention. And then the name of the image we can use, for example, hello world go. Okay. And here we need to define we can use, for example, dot to tell Docker that we are creating the Docker file in the same directory. Okay. And now let me just run this command here. Okay, now we have this. If we type docker image ls, then you can see that we have our Docker image defined here, hello world go. Okay. And now if I just copy the name of this image here that we just built and type docker run and the name of this image, and we can also define a name for our container, for example, hello world go. I guess that I need to define the name before the name of the image, yes. Hello world go. Yes, the name of the image must be the last thing the last option of this command. Okay, so docker one name, and then the name of the image, the name of the container first, and then the name of the image. Okay, and now as you can see, we have this hello world message. If we change, for example, the Golang file, for example, here we can type, instead of hello world, let me change to hello docker. Okay, now let me build again. So docker build, and then let me run again the docker run. Now we should see hello docker. Okay, no, this one. Okay, I need to define a new name, so let me change it to hello world go 2. Okay, nice. As you can see, we are creating our own image using the Golang as a base, and we are just creating a new container here using this image, okay, this hello world go. So now let's see another options that we have in this docker run command. And another command that we can use with the docker run is the -it. For example, we can run docker run -it, and then we can use, for example, Linux distribution, let's say the Ubuntu, okay? And then this it option, basically it is the interactive mode, and it will attach the terminal to the docker command we are executing, for example, the bash, okay? And then we will open a command line inside the Ubuntu, okay, inside the container running Ubuntu, okay? So let me see here. As you can see, I don't have the Ubuntu image in my machine, so I'm downloading this image right now, and now I am inside the Ubuntu machine, okay, inside the Ubuntu container, okay? And here I can type any command. For example, let me see this one. As you can see, I have all these folders here inside the Ubuntu. I can do, for example, apt.get and then install some new package here. And this is pretty useful when you are running container and you need to go inside this machine or this container to type some command or debug something or see what's going on there, okay? So this is another useful command, okay? So let me exit here. And now if we type, for example, docker ps-a, you can see that I have these containers here in my machine. So I can basically remove them. For example, let me take this example here, and I can just run docker rm and then the name of the container. Okay, so now if I type docker ps again, you can see that I don't have this container anymore. I have this another one, but the hello world go 2, I don't have it anymore. Okay, so this is how we can remove a container. We have seen how to start or how to create a new container based on an image. We also have seen how to create an image using a Dockerfile. And now let me show you how to map some ports from the container to your machine. That's also pretty useful. For example, let me run, for example, a new container for the Nginx. Okay, if you don't know, Nginx, it's basically a web server. Okay, so let me run this command here. Okay, and now as you can see, I am running the container using Nginx. Okay, and as it's a web server, it's still running. Okay, it's not like executable like we did with the Golang file. We just executed the hello world and then we stopped. Now here we have this container running because it's a web server. So let me try to access this using the localhost. So if I go to localhost, for example, usually is it at the web server, the Nginx is exposed in the 8 port, right? So let me try to access it. So I cannot access, and that's because the port is exposed on the container. but not in our machine. So that's very important. When the container exposes a port, 8 for example, it doesn't mean that we can access it on the Docker host or whenever in the Docker that, or in the machine that executing Docker. Okay. In order to access a port in the Docker host or in our machine, in this case, we need to run using this command here. For example, -p, and then we can map the port to the container to our machine. For example, we can use the 8.8 port in our machine and map it to the 8 port in the container side, on the container side. Okay, so let me run it again using the Nginx. Now let me try to access it. Let me see what else I need to do here. Okay, because I need to access the port 8.8 in my machine. Okay, and now I have this welcome to Nginx, which is executing in this container. Okay, so this is very important. When you need to access something in the container, you need to use this option here. Okay, and now I can, instead of run this command again, for example, I can just use, let me find it here. Yeah, this is the one using Nginx. This is the latest one. As you can see, when we don't define a name for the container, the Docker generate a random name for us, and usually it's a pretty weird name like this one, Elegant Allen, but we can also define our custom name. Okay, so for now, let me take this container here, and we can just, for example, now that we have this container in our machine, we can just use Docker start and then pass the ID or the name of the container. Now if I type Docker PS, now I have this container running here, and if I access it, you can see that it's working. And we can also run Docker stop to stop this container, for example. Now if I type Docker PS again, we can see that we don't have that container running anymore. And if I try to access, you can see that it's not working. Okay. And another useful command we can use is Docker exec to execute some commands in the container. For example, I can use it to, let's say, run inside the Nginx container the list command. Now, as you can see, I'm listing all the folders and all files inside this container. Okay, and you can type any type of command here. This was just an example. And another thing that is pretty useful is Docker logs. And then you can pass again the ID of the container or the name of the container. And then we have the access to all the logs inside this container. Okay, this is also pretty useful. Now let's come back to the Docker objects. And the last two objects I want to talk about are the Docker volumes and the Docker networks. And the first one is volumes. And images in Docker container are immutable, which means that we cannot write and modify something inside the Docker image. However, we can write and modify something inside the container, not in the image, but in the container. However, when we do that and we stop the container, we will lose everything. However, to avoid losing this data, Docker provides volumes and also bind mounts two mechanisms for persisting data in the containers. Using these techniques, we mount a folder or volume that is inside our computer to the container. Okay, so if the container terminate, if we stop the container, these files are inside our computer, inside our machine, and we don't lose it. Okay, and nowadays the volumes are the recommended way to persist data inside the containers. They have much higher performance than byte mountains, and they can be shared among multiple containers. And it's also easier to backup or migrate than byte mountains, okay? And we can manage volumes using Docker CLI commands. For example, let me see here. Let me show you some examples of volumes as well. For example, we can type Docker volume ls to list the volumes that we have. As you can see, I have some of them, some volumes on my machine. And we can also create a new one. For example, Docker volume create my new volume. Okay, now if you type again, we have this new volume here. Okay, and we can use, for example, Docker volume inspect to show more details of this volume. Okay, so when it was created, mount point, the name, and some information here. And when we run a container, for example, Docker run, let me run again Nginx container. For example, here we can pass the volume using the -v option, and then the name of our volume. For example, in our case, this is my new volume here, and we can map it to a file in our machine. For example, /app. Okay, and then the last step is the name of the image. So let me try run this thing. Okay, I'm using the same part. Let me try it with a new one. Here. Okay, I need to define a new name as well. 2. And this is basically how we can create a volume in using Docker CLI. And now all the files that we change inside the container will be mapped to this app folder in our machine. Okay. And now let's talk about networks. And networking is basically the process of connecting containers to each other. Docker uses the bridge network by default. We are going to see that. But we can use other networks like the host network or the overlay network. But the bridge is the most common one, is the default type of network. We're going to see how to create that. And it basically connects all the containers together, okay? And we can also manage the networks using the CLI. For example, we can type Docker network create, and then we need to pass the type of the driver or the type of the network. Like I said, the bridge is the most common one. And then we can define the name of the network. For example, my new network. Okay, and also we have a inspect command. For example, we can type Docker network inspect, and then the name of the network. And also we have some information here. Okay. Okay, now we have this container running on our machine. Let me see. Yeah. And we can now create a new container, for example, Docker run. And then we can pass, for example, let me define the name here, like nginx new. Okay. And here I can define the network. For example, I'm going to use the my new network. Okay. And then I need to pass the image, which is nginx, and let me define the ports here as well. So for this one, I'm going to use a 2 to map to the 80 of the container. Okay, so if I run this command, it's Docker. I type it wrong here. So Docker. Okay, it's 2 dashes to define the network. All right, so now let me open a new command line here. And if I type Docker PS, now I have 2 different containers. So the first one is this one, and the second one in the port 82, right? Yes. So here, right now, like I said, I'm using the new network in this latest container I just created. I just did it by defining the network option when running this new container. And here I can connect this existing container in this network as well. I can do that basically by typing docker network and then connect, and then the name of the network, in this case my new network, and then the name of the container or the ID of the container. In our case, it is this one. This is the first container we created, which is running right now in the 8 port. Okay. So if I run this command right now, and if I run docker network inspect, I can see here that I have 2 containers, the nginx new and this another one that we didn't define a name, so Docker basically created a random name for us. But this is the container that is running in this port here. Okay. And right now we have these 2 containers running in the same network, which means that we can basically, for example, inside, let me see, inside the second container, for example, this one here, we can just type docker exec, and then we can use this option here to run to open the terminal inside the container. So inside this container, okay, we can run the bash command. All right, so now we are inside the first container, and if we type, for example, ping, and then the name of the new container, in our case nginx new, it should work. Let's see. Okay, don't have the ping option, but I guess that I can install it here just for this example. Okay, let me try to do a apt-get update, and then I can run apt-get install, and then IP utils dash ping. Okay, let me see right now. Yeah, I have the ping option right now. So if I type ping and then the name of the first container, the name of the latest container we just created, okay? And remember, both of them are in the same network. Now it should work. Let's see. Yeah, it's working. And now I can access another container, as you can see, because they are both using the same network, okay? So that's why we use network basically to connect containers to each other, okay? And now that we have seen the most important Docker objects and the most common CLI commands, let's see how to manage multiple containers using Docker Compose. Okay, and to not make this video too long, I will talk about Docker Compose in the next video, so see you there.